Most police officers deal with crime, danger, and life or death situations. But sometimes they witness things that can't be explained, things that make even the toughest officers question reality. Imagine responding to a call only to find that the person who made it doesn't exist, or chasing a suspect only to watch them vanish into thin air. Some cases are never solved, not because of criminals, but because of something far more terrifying. These are 5 disturbing police horror stories that will haunt you long after the lights go out. Night shifts can be boring, the kind where you count the hours until sunrise. But every officer knows when something does happen in the dead of night, it's never anything good. It started with a routine call. A woman, voice trembling, reported hearing whispers and footsteps in the abandoned house next to hers. She claimed she had seen someone staring at her through a shattered window, just standing there, motionless. But when she called out, the figure simply disappeared. I arrived at the scene with my partner, the old house looming in the darkness. The windows were broken, the paint was peeling, and the front door was slightly open, as if it had been waiting for us. I stepped inside, and instantly, the air felt different. It was thick, stale, carrying an unnatural stillness. My flashlight cut through the dust, illuminating furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. We moved carefully, clearing each room one by one. Nothing, just silence. We were about to call it in as a false alarm when something shifted at the end of the hallway. My flashlight caught it for just a second. A tall, shadowy figure standing completely still. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, just watching. And then, the light flickered, and it was gone. My stomach twisted. I rushed forward, scanning every corner, every doorway. There was no way out except for the entrance we had just come through. So where did it go? And then, the whisper came, right behind us. "You shouldn't be here." It was low, hoarse, almost inhuman. My blood turned to ice. My partner spun around, gun drawn, but there was nothing. Just the empty hallway. And then our radios crackled with deafening static, followed by complete silence. That was it. We were out. We bolted from that house, and I don't care what anyone says, but I know what I saw. The next day, I found out a man had died in that house, alone, under mysterious circumstances. No one ever found out what happened to him. Some say his soul never left. And after that night, I believe it. I don't scare easily, but I will never, never step foot in that house again. The night was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that made even the hum of my patrol car sound deafening. I was driving down a desolate highway just outside of town, where the road stretched endlessly, swallowed by darkness on all sides. No streetlights, no passing cars, just an empty stretch of asphalt cutting through the wilderness. It was past midnight, and my shift was nearly over when I saw her. A lone woman stood on the side of the road, illuminated only by my headlights. She wasn't frantically waving like most stranded motorists, just a slow, deliberate motion of her hand, as if she knew I would stop. She wore a long, pale dress that fluttered slightly in the night breeze, and her hair fell over her face, obscuring most of her features. Something about her stance, her stillness, made my pulse quicken. But as an officer, it was my duty to help. I pulled over, lowering my window slightly. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" She lifted her head just enough for me to see her face. It was off. Not scared, not relieved, just blank. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "I need a ride home." A cold unease settled in my chest, but I nodded. "All right, get in the back." The door creaked open, and as soon as she settled into the seat, the temperature in my car dropped. A chill so intense that my breath immediately fogged up the windshield. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. This wasn't normal. "Where to?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "Just keep driving," she murmured. "I'll tell you when to stop." The highway remained empty as I drove, the silence between us thick and heavy. Every few minutes I stole glances at the rearview mirror. At first, she looked the same, pale, distant, almost doll-like. But then I noticed something strange. Her face shifted. Her features seemed to sink, her eyes hollowing out, her skin growing even paler. I blinked hard, gripping the wheel tighter. Maybe it was a trick of the dim lighting. Maybe I was just exhausted. But the more I looked, the worse it got. Her fingers, folded neatly in her lap, appeared thinner, almost skeletal. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to keep driving. "Almost there," she whispered suddenly. I swallowed hard. "Where exactly is there?" She didn't answer. The road ahead stretched into the darkness, but as we approached a curve, a small, rusted street sign caught my headlights. The name on it made my stomach drop. It was the name of a cemetery. I slammed on the brakes. My hands were shaking as I turned around to demand an explanation. But the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. My pulse thundered in my ears as I threw the car into park and jumped out, shining my flashlight around. The road was still deserted. The trees stood still in the cold night air, their branches unmoving. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had dozed off for a second, hallucinated the entire thing. And then I saw it. Written in the fog on my back window, in long, uneven letters, were 4 words. "Thank you for the ride." My blood ran ice cold. My hands shook as I wiped the window clean, hoping, praying, that it was just condensation playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I jumped back into the car, locked the doors, and floored it. The highway blurred past as I sped back toward town, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That was the last time I ever patrolled that highway alone. Some calls stay with you forever, not because they were the most dangerous, but because they were the ones that defied explanation. This was one of them. It was past midnight when dispatch received a 911 call from an elderly woman. Her voice was weak, shaking with fear. She said someone was outside her house trying to get in. She could hear them moving around, scratching at the windows. I was the closest unit, so I hit the lights and sirens and sped toward the address. The moment I pulled up, something felt off. The house stood in complete darkness, no porch light, no movement inside, just a hollow, lifeless structure swallowed by the night. I stepped out of my cruiser, my breath visible in the cold air, and approached the front door. I knocked. Nothing. I called out, "Ma'am, this is the police. Can you hear me?" Silence. I knocked harder. Still nothing. Something wasn't right. I took a step back and scanned the windows, shining my flashlight inside. The house was empty. Absolutely empty. The furniture was covered in sheets, dust thick in the air. It didn't look like anyone had lived there for years. I radioed dispatch to confirm the address, expecting them to tell me I was at the wrong house. Instead, what they said made my stomach drop. "Officer, that house has been abandoned for over 30 years. A slow, uneasy chill crawled up my spine. I turned back toward the house, gripping my flashlight tighter. I had just received a 911 call from inside a house that had been empty for decades. I circled around the property, my boots crunching over dead leaves. The windows were cracked and broken, the front porch sagging under its own weight. I peered through another window, sweeping my light across the dusty interior. That's when I saw it. Everything was untouched, covered in layers of dust, except for one thing. The phone. It was off the hook. I swallowed hard. Someone or something had just used it. I pressed my radio, my voice lower now. "Dispatch, can you trace the call?" There was a long, heavy pause. Then, finally, the operator spoke, their voice almost a whisper. "Officer, the call came from inside the house." My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned back toward the front door. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I had to go inside. I reached for the rusted doorknob and pushed. It creaked open on its own. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature plunged. It was a suffocating kind of cold, the kind that presses against your skin and wraps around your bones. The air smelled stale, like mildew and something faintly rotting. My footsteps echoed as I moved toward the phone, its receiver still dangling, swaying slightly, as if someone had just placed it down. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and unsteady. I hesitated, then slowly reached out and picked up the receiver. At first, all I heard was static, a low, crackling hum whispering through the speaker. Then, something else, a sound, like breathing, slow, deep, ragged. I felt my blood turn to ice. The breathing grew louder, closer, as if someone or something was right there, pressing against the other end of the line. Then came the sound that will haunt me forever, a faint, inhuman chuckle. I dropped the phone, the crash echoing through the empty house. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My instincts screamed at me to leave. And I did. I turned and ran, nearly tripping over the threshold as I bolted back to my cruiser. I slammed the door shut, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my chest heaving. I don't know who made that call. I don't know what was inside that house. But one thing is certain. That house was abandoned. But it was not empty, and I'll never, never go back. I was just about to clock out when the call came in. The dispatcher's voice had a strange edge to it. "Officer 219, we have a report from a local resident. Claims there's someone standing in the woods behind his house. Hasn't moved for hours." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "A trespasser. Probably some lost hiker or a drunk teenager messing around in the dark." "Address?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. The dispatcher hesitated. That's when I knew something was off. "The caller is Harold Grayson. Lives alone, elderly, and, we've had calls from him before." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" There was a pause, then in a low voice, the dispatcher said, "About the thing in his woods." A cold chill crept up my spine, but I pushed it away. Probably just an old man seeing shadows. "I'll check it out." I pulled up to the house about 20 minutes later. It was an old, creaky place, nestled at the edge of a dense forest. No streetlights, no neighbors, just miles of thick, black trees stretching into nowhere. Harold was already waiting on his porch, arms wrapped around himself like he was freezing, even though it wasn't that cold. His face looked pale under the dim glow of his porch light. "Officer," he croaked, "it's still there." I followed his shaking hand as he pointed toward the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees swaying in the wind. Then I saw it, a figure, tall, motionless, hidden in the darkness just beyond the reach of the porch light. I squinted. It had the outline of a man, but something was wrong. The proportions were off. It was too thin, too long. Its arms hung at an unnatural length, its fingers dangling near its knees. "Sir, how long has it been there?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Harold didn't take his eyes off it. "Since sundown," he whispered. "It doesn't move. It just watches." I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at the figure. The beam flickered the moment it touched it, like the batteries were dying. Then the figure tilted its head. Not like a normal person. It was a sharp, unnatural movement, as if its neck were made of stiff, creaking wood. A deep, instinctive fear rose in my chest. Something in my brain screamed, "This isn't human." I took a step forward, my hand on my holster. "Hey," I called. "You're trespassing. Show me your hands." It didn't react. I took another step. "Last warning. Show me your hands or I'll..." It moved. Not like a person walking. Not like anything I'd ever seen. It shifted, its limbs jerking in unnatural angles, like it was being pulled by invisible strings. And before I could blink, it was closer. No sound, no footsteps, just there. The flashlight in my hand flickered violently. Static filled my radio. A sudden high-pitched ringing exploded in my ears. Then came the roar. Loud, distorted. Not an animal, not human. Something else. Something wrong. Harold screamed. I stumbled backward, my hands covering my ears. My vision blurred, my head pounding. And then, silence. When I looked up, the figure was gone. The forest was still, too still, like the world itself was holding its breath. I turned to Harold. He was shaking, his face pale as a sheet. "It's playing with you," he whispered. "Just like it plays with me." I grabbed my radio, but all I heard was static. My flashlight, dead. That was enough for me. "Get inside and lock your doors," I told Harold. He didn't argue. I hurried to my car, but as I reached for the door handle, something made me stop. A feeling, a presence. Slowly, I turned my head back toward the forest. There, just beyond the tree line, it was watching me. Closer this time. Grinning. I slammed the door shut and floored it, speeding away from that house and that godforsaken forest. Back at the station, I told the dispatcher there was nothing there, that the call was a false alarm, that Harold had probably just seen a shadow. But I knew the truth, and I knew one thing for certain. I will never answer a call near that forest again, because some things aren't meant to be found, and some things, once they find you, never stop watching. Hospitals are unsettling places. Death lingers in the air. And the morgue, that's where the dead wait. That's where this story takes place. It was just past 3 a.m. when the call came in from the county hospital. A security guard, voice shaking, reported a disturbance in the basement morgue. I arrived within minutes, expecting a drunk trespasser or maybe a lost patient. But when I met the guard, his face was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. "What kind of disturbance?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "There's someone in there," he whispered, "but they're not supposed to be." We took the elevator down. The morgue was silent except for the quiet hum of refrigeration units. The air was cold, sterile, thick with the scent of disinfectant. The guard pointed toward a storage area in the back. "I saw him standing there," he said. I turned to call for help, and when I looked back, he was gone. I stepped forward, sweeping my flashlight across the room. The rows of steel drawers gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights. Then I noticed something strange. One of the body lockers was slightly open. My stomach tightened. I moved closer, gripping the handle, and pulled it open the rest of the way. Inside, covered in a white sheet, lay the body of a man. His face was pale, lifeless, his eyes closed, but his hands were in a different position than the official report had stated. They had been resting at his sides, but now they were crossed over his chest. The guard let out a shaky breath. That wasn't like that before." I turned to him. "Are you sure no one else came down here?" He nodded quickly. "The only way in or out is the elevator, and I've been here the whole time." A sudden bang echoed from across the room. I spun around, heart hammering. One of the other storage drawers had slammed shut on its own. The guard bolted for the elevator. I wanted to run too, but something compelled me to look back one last time. The body, the dead man, his eyes were open, and he was staring directly at me. I don't remember hitting the elevator button. I don't remember running to my car. But I do remember the security footage they showed me the next day. It showed me walking into the morgue, searching, checking the body. But the strange part, the camera never recorded the body moving. It never captured the drawer slamming, and it never, ever showed his eyes opening. But I know what I saw, and I know without a doubt that the dead man wasn't resting in peace. Some stories stay with you forever, especially the ones that can't be explained. These officers swore to protect and serve, but what they encountered went far beyond crime and human nature. Shadowy figures, vanishing hitchhikers, calls from the dead. These aren't just urban legends. They are real experiences shared by those who lived through them. So the next time you hear footsteps when no one is there, see something move in the corner of your eye, or get a call from an empty house, ask yourself, are you really alone? Let me know in the comments. Do you believe in the supernatural? Or do you think there's a logical explanation for these cases? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed these chilling stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on.